Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
So, what's on your mind this week? Are you reading anything interesting?
Well, a couple things are on my mind. First off, it's spring break. So for me, what that means is our son finally comes back. So we get to hang out with our son. He's, down at Austin, attending University of Texas in Austin. And then our daughter, I like spring break for our school-age students because when she gets to sleep in, I get about 15 or 20 more minutes of sleep in the morning.
Bonus.
Yeah.
Bonus for you.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice. So you asked me a question about reading. Yeah, I am reading a book right now. There's a book that Richard Rohr, you asked me earlier when he wrote it, 2004. So it's an older book that he wrote. I love Richard Rohr. He's great. Anyways, the book is called Adam's Return, and it's a book on spirituality and male initiation. I just started. I can't tell you all the details of it, but I'm interested by it. I'm intrigued by it, and you know this about me, and I'm not going to get into a lot of it right now because maybe it could be a future podcast, but I'm interested in providing men a healthy framework for how to live in this world. Again, without getting into detail, I just think the options out there are limited, and I think there's a few streams of Christianity that are promoting a version that I don't know is healthy or not, and so that's a different conversation.
It does seem like culture informed more than our faith informed.
Yeah.
To be whole humans, and so that's something different to do.
And I feel like not every man is the same, and just like every human being, we're all first born in the image of God. There's a piece of us that I think is inherently divine, and then we're also unique. And so one of the angles is I don't think there's not one single version out there that says, yeah, that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and a male. So I'm interested, okay, but what are some basic frameworks? What are some things that we need to be doing to be a better, healthier version of what God has called us to be? So anyways, reading Richard Rohr's book, Adam's Return. Yeah.
So I've been reading.
I was about to ask you that. Yeah. So you are about to graduate.
I am. I graduated in May.
That's exciting.
Exciting. The end of the
So when I was in college, especially in grad school, there's a lot of reading, at least in kind of theology degrees, and it's tough when somebody recommends you a book in the middle of your schooling because you're like, I'm sorry, I'm already reading like 5 books right now. Have you experienced that?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I'm a chronic, I want to read this, so I buy it, and then my stack of to reads is growing.
I was like, yeah.
And I haven't gotten to touch it.
So you have a stack of books you haven't touched, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And
I've been
I
there.
also started, instead of buying them all, I'll, bookmark them, so I can come back and buy them later.
Yeah.
But,
Not only do I have a stack, but I stack it in a way where this one, I need to read this one first. But the problem is the one that's like 4 down. I'm like, man, I really want to read that. You know who's really bad about recommending books to me, and I love it. I'm not saying this in a bad way. Is Tim McMenemy.
yes, he and I.
He is a reader.
And he does the same thing I do. He buys a lot to read at some point.
Yeah. That guy is well read. He goes, have you read this book yet? I'm like, no, I haven't. Familiar with the author? Yeah, I'm familiar with the author. But anyway, so I love it. I think it's great.
So yeah, the book I'm reading this week is Life Together by Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
So it's a good one. And,
Short,
Yeah.
but it's heavy. Like you have to because it's written in the,
Yeah.
I don't even remember when it was written, 30s maybe? I think it's one of his earlier books. I feel like it's,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's written different.
Yes. Yeah. So getting used to the language is part of it. But yeah, it's been good.
It's awesome.
And I also, so with our course where we go and I do our residency, we get to do a book of fiction. And so the fiction book is Theo of Golden. Have you heard anything about this book?
No.
I actually read it over Christmas break. I'm going to read
Is it new or is it?
It's relatively new. I think
Gotcha.
It came out in 25.
Yeah.
So,
Who wrote that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a lawyer for years and years and just decided to write a book, and it's his first book, and it's gotten a lot.
I love that. Being a preacher, pastor, or whatever, I read a lot of books that are theology and stuff, but I've gotten into other things as well. Like, I don't just read the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. I love the Bible. So, yeah. Ugh, I just feel like I just got in trouble for that one. Like, what?
How dare you?
Yeah.
I think you have to be well-rounded, right?
There you go.
And
Sure.
hearing what is being said in the culture, I think matters.
Yeah, and sometimes people who aren't part of whether it's my specific Christian tradition or even Christianity in general, they're saying things that I should be at least listening to. So,
I love that. Okay, so let's hop into our topic for today. We're going to talk a little bit about Easter and that in the context of our faith. So first off, what are your Easter traditions?
so that's part of the reason why I think we want to do this podcast is, I would say historically, Tara and I didn't have many traditions except for Easter Sunday itself. And at least in our specific tradition, we made Easter into an important day. And we definitely would either do hide eggs, and then the kids would kind of go look for eggs, and there was always one or two special eggs. But of course, we'd figure out a way where they would each get one. So not one would find all the good eggs. They would kind of separate them, right? Yeah, we kept it fair in our family. And they'd do that in the morning. Then we dress up all nice, go to church, have a nice kind of Easter lunch. And then of course, in the context of church was resurrection. So that was kind of our tradition. And then I would say in more recent years, and I would even say especially this year, I've been asking more questions about what Easter is. And honestly, the questions I'm asking, some have already asked those questions thousands of years ago. And so there's a deeper tradition of Easter that I think some of us who are maybe not used to it should be paying attention to. What about you?
Yeah, so growing up, we always did an egg hunt on our farmland out in the pasture.
That's a lot of land. 1,200-acre egg hunt?
For days.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Thanksgiving, and you're like, oh, there's an egg.
So we come back in past years and found an old egg like a year later. We're like, we always mark it off. There have to be clear boundaries.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
But it usually becomes a weekend affair because we
Gotcha.
go out to the farm and then everybody likes to be out there and play, So it's been interesting in the last several years as well, where like I've been participating on Thursday, which is with four Emerald churches.
Yeah.
I love that service, but then typically I do that, and then the next day we're headed to the farm and it's all fun.
Yeah.
For days. And so it's a really funny mixture of trying to pay attention to this season, but then it's just all about the fun and the togetherness, which is also important, but you lose some of the value.
Yeah, Holy Week is a fascinating week in all the different things or events that take place within the gospel, but now have essentially shaped and formed into tradition, rituals, certain evenings and days throughout the week that many traditions practice, especially some of your high church traditions, like your Episcopalians, your Presbyterians, your Catholic, but some of our lower church traditions like ours typically was just Sunday focused, but recent years, at least at Central, and I'm sure in other places as well, we've at least gravitated to Monday, Thursday, because for us it's kind of a unity event with some downtown churches. And then some of us may, and I'd be interested, even some of our viewers and listeners may attend a Good Friday service. We don't host one, but I know many of our churches do that as well. But yeah.
So how do we approach Easter as a season rather than just a one-day special event?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of wrapping my mind around, because I do feel like, at least again, speaking towards our specific tradition, that we've done a lot better job with Advent. And because I would say, again, I grew up with holidays specifically focused on the specific days. So like for me as a kid, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day was amazing, right? but then realizing that Advent is more like a season and not just a couple of days. And so the first thing I would say we need to do is, and you kind of mentioned that or alluded that already in your question, is recognizing that Easter isn't just a holiday or even a week. I would say there's an entire season. In fact, in antiquity, it was like 50 days. And then I would say today it's like Lent, and then the days leading up to Easter. And so I think whether we like to use the word or know how to use the word Lent and all those different traditions and practices within that season, but the point of framing it as a full season within the calendar, I think, matters.
Something I've really loved in recent years is paying attention to the church calendar that you mentioned high church and low church, and that's not a ranking system. That's a process of how we do church when we're together, right? But the church calendar I love because it kind of resets. It's kind of countercultural. The culture is moving ahead at this pace, but the church calendar kind of has to slow down and have that focus. Do you do anything with the church calendar?
So I went to a preacher cohort thing recently. And in fact, the whole idea was, how do you preach on Lent? And one of the resources and tools was a Lenten calendar. And so I read through it, but I haven't done much with it. Now, I will say in years past, I've done a few like fasting practices for Lent season. But this year, like just for me personally, I have a rule of life. And I've been in a season where it's been hard for me to maintain it. And I think that's just natural. And so for me, Lent has been be more mindful and more intentional for my rule of life. And so that's been more my calendar. It's been more of some of my daily practices, trying to get into those. But one thing I was thinking about was we all have calendars in our lives. And whether we realize it or not, the calendar has more control over our lives than we want to admit. If you're a school teacher, when do you go on vacation? Like, your calendar determines who you are in your life in many ways. I think it has more control and power than we think. And so for me, why not invest and create a calendar already that I have in my life and bring in Christian tradition and ritual and practices? Because then what happens is that I think the calendar forces us to realize that our faith is not just something we do certain holidays, but we almost inhabit a story, and it's a year-long story. And so rather than Easter just be a day or two, I'm invited into a long story that I think is not just God's story, but it's also our story. And that story should be framing and shaping my life. And so this year specifically, it's more maybe cognitive, more emotional, but I'm really trying to pay attention to how Easter is more than just a couple of days. And then maybe more importantly, how does Easter reinforce, shape, form, restore, renew, whatever word or churchy word you want to use, but all these different words transform my faith. Because I do think that this season should be transforming us.
Yeah. I've seen a diagram that lays out the church calendar because it begins with Advent. So you're actually not starting at January 1,
right.
You're beginning at the beginning of Advent, which is usually around December 1st, maybe November. And it shows the top half of the circle. It goes Advent to Easter, which is the story of Jesus. And then the rest of the year is called ordinary time, and that's the story of the people. And I kind of like that focus. And there's just something about if we're keeping something in mind for a longer period of time. So thinking about Easter. As a church, we've been using this prayer throughout this Easter season. There's something about thinking about that daily for a longer period of time than just considering one thing on one Sunday.
Yep.
I think it brings more change. Anything else you want to say about that? Is there some theology we need to be paying attention to with that?
Yeah, so I would say again, if Easter just becomes a holiday or just a day that we celebrate, I'm just taking my own story, then I feel that Easter Day itself, and depending upon whether or not you even think about Good Friday, but these just become days that almost like, oh yeah, it's Easter. And then from that day, whether it's through the sermon or the worship service, I might gain some knowledge, or might gain new information, or might just rehear the story of what transpired a couple thousand years ago. And what I would encourage us as Christians to do is to really pay attention to the cross and to resurrection. And there's not many opportunities where we get to carve out space in our lives to do that. Because the cross isn't just simply Jesus did something for you and me. The cross is an invitation for us to live in as well. And that's why for me, if we inhabit this kind of the story and use calendar as kind of a way to do that, then I'm also inhabiting the story of the cross. And that becomes kind of a part of my life. And I would say the same thing for resurrection. And I would say what resurrection also provides us is hope. And kind of a bigger hope than what's in front of us. And I think you can say this for every calendar year, but with all the things that are going on, whether it's around the world or maybe in our hearts, in our own local lives, I think just being reminded of a deeper hope that kind of projects us into an eternal future of salvation with God is something that we would all probably would like to hold on to for at least a little while.
I think of all the places in Scripture where God is telling us to remember His story, remember our story, remember when the Lord did this for you. Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," when we're doing communion. And I just think we are forgetful people, and so something to help keep those things front of mind for us, I think, is important.
Yeah, and I want to see the whole Holy Week, like people think about it, because there's so much going on, right? So like you have Palm Sunday, this triumphant entry, and then you have all these unique stories that take place that we should be aware of, that like kind of either pierce our souls, that requires us to kind of think about where we're at in our own lives, from Peter's betrayal to Judas's betrayal. I mean, think about it. Judas betrayed God. Jesus is God in flesh for money. And for those of us who live in a world of power and wealth and prosperity, that should like go, oh, wait a minute. Like, let me use this time to kind of reframe how I think about those things. Or the Last Supper, the final supper, and the invitation that Christ does for us and with us. And he does it. So he begins as a king, but then if you especially when you read John, the final supper, he's a servant. So there's these like kind of these, not, I don't know if it's contradictory or dichotomy, but you see Jesus as king and Jesus as servant. And there's something beautiful about that, is that he finds the most power through the lens of serving, not through the lens of ruling. Again, something we should be really thinking about and paying attention to. And then again, I've already brought it up, but then all of this leads to the cross and eventually to the resurrection. So yeah, I find this season to be more and more meaningful and something that we should be holding on to as long as possible. And so like Advent or like any other calendar season, maybe rather than just see it as a day, we just maybe dwell with it a little longer.
So as followers of Jesus, we want to always have our eyes open to what God is doing around us. And paying a little more attention this Easter season, maybe one of those ways for you, but it has been for us. So thanks for spending this time with us today. We'll have more episodes.